her commentary was discriminatory and derogatory to trans people, even though no trans people came forward to actually be complainants here. There were no trans people harmed in the making.
Lisa Bildy, she is Amy Hamm's lawyer. And unless you've been hiding under a rock, she lost her job as a nurse because she put a billboard up endorsing J.K. Rowling's. Now she basically is being fined $90,000 in order to keep her license or to get it back. Her license has been suspended for a month. Is that correct? Am I pretty close?
Pretty close, but there's some different context to add to that. It was the J.K. Rowling billboard that and some media around that got her on the radar of some activists. And then they complained to her regulator, and the regulator started an investigation that looked at all her tweets and all her podcasts and everything she'd ever said, and had like a 300-page dossier of all the things that they thought were objectionable. So that is really what kind of went forward to a disciplinary hearing. So that's her regulator. That's the college that decides, like, that licenses people to get to be nurses or whatever. Sorry if I'm a bit laggy. I know I can see my screen lagging. Sorry if it's not great quality.
All good. Your
voice is good though.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And her job was a separate issue. But after the college found her to be guilty of unprofessional conduct, then her employer fired her as well. So that's a separate issue. We're taking both of them to the Human Rights Tribunal in BC for discriminating against her on the basis of her gender-critical political beliefs.
Yeah, I know in the UK there was a somewhat of a similar case on Maya Forstater, and the outcome of that case was that the tribunal said that gender-critical views are, I believe the exact words were, worthy of respect in a democratic society or something like that. Essentially, protected beliefs. Do we have a similar ruling for precedents in Canada that you can rely on in the courtroom, or are you going to have to essentially try to create one here?
We're going to have to create one. Those arguments were raised during her disciplinary hearing, which was like a 22-day thing. We had a lot of argument. We used all those British cases that were very helpful, but the panel wasn't bound by them in any way, and ultimately decided not to. They respected that her views were sincerely held. They did say that, but what they also said was her commentary was discriminatory and derogatory to trans people, even though no trans people came forward to actually be complainants here. There were no trans people harmed in the making of, they assumed that people would be hurt by it. There's no evidence, no direct evidence of that. And, in terms of her views, though, they said, well, surely you can advocate for women and girls and young people without being discriminatory against trans people. Oh, but by the way, you can't advocate and exclude trans people. So you can't say, I want to have women's spaces and then also exclude women, trans women from that category. So essentially what they're saying is you cannot advocate, nicely or not, you cannot advocate for biological women's spaces in British Columbia if you're a regulated professional.
Let me ask you this. This is the part I never understand, because if we are in a free society, if we are in a place where we have charters of rights and where we have the right to freedom of speech, like we're capable of saying what we think, why is it okay for them to reduce being a woman to anybody that feels like a woman, but it's not okay for a biological woman to say that a guy with a penis can't be a woman? Why are both speeches not protected equally?
Well, that's a good question. It's really the question of the day. Everybody's noticing that there's a double standard in this country, and when it comes to enforcement of speech rules. This is one of the things that I find the most offensive about where our regulatory bodies are these days. They will throw the book at somebody who they feel is unprofessional or is embarrassing the college because they have views that a select group that seems to now be controlling these institutions thinks is the only view you can have. But you've got professionals out advocating for various, radical other things, sometimes identifying their employer, certainly identifying their occupation, but that's okay because it's in comportment with, whatever views these people already hold. So it's very selective. And so in my view, they shouldn't be allowed to regulate this at all. They can't be trusted to be fair about it. And frankly, they shouldn't be regulating off-duty speech anyway, in my opinion, because it doesn't go to the real issues that we need regulators for, if we need them at all, which is to regulate, to ensure that there's competence, basic skills when someone is getting a doctor, nurse, engineer, whatever, that they have basic skills and basic ethics, right? So that if you're a lawyer, you're not skimming the trust fund. Why are our views being regulated at all? And I think that's really the question that we need to confront. And governments, sympathetic governments, if there are any, need to put the screws to these organizations and basically take away those powers, because I don't think they're being used fairly.
I couldn't agree more. So I have a question. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the case of Rachel Dolezal down in the States. She was a white woman who was head of the NAACP in, I believe it was Seattle, who I think she tinted her skin and basically identified as a Black woman. And when, of course, she was found out, it was, the worst thing ever. She was, of course, canceled, and it was essentially evil. And I guess from a legal perspective, I would ask, what is the difference between if a man can identify as something he is not, i.e. a woman, why can't Rachel Dolezal or any white person identify as, a Black person or any race that they want? And this is a bit of a rhetorical question, but from a legal perspective, I'm curious, is there any difference?
Well, there is a difference because we have decided, whoever was short-sightedly did this, that gender identity is a protected quality. So, if you view yourself to be of a different sex, because they conflate these all the time. They accuse us of conflating sex and gender, but that's essentially what they are doing themselves. If you view yourself as the opposite sex, you're protected in that view, right? It's guaranteed under all the human rights codes that you should not be discriminated against on the basis of your basically your self-identification. Now, that isn't the same way for the other, if somebody was to identify into a different race or whatever. That's not, I think it's a logical extension of where that goes or where it should go, but I think that the transgender individuals have a protection built in already through legislation that came about in the mid-2010s.
Do you see a resemblance of this case with Jordan Peterson's case with the what is it called? It's the Ontario Psychologists Union, or the actual part, not the party, but the group responsible for giving out the licenses for psychologists in Ontario, are kind of doing the same thing with Jordan Peterson, where they wanted him to get re-educated how to be taught how to behave online, because he questioned a trans. And he basically, as far as I know, he said, you know what, I don't need my license anymore. I make enough money. I don't need this. But are you seeing a resemblance to Amy's case, as in they're trying to crush dissent? They're just, we're going to make it so impossible for you to comply that at the end of the day, you're just going to say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to walk away from my license because it's just not worth it.
Well, yeah, and getting back to what I was saying is that a lot of these, so these are regulators, okay? They're created by statute in each of the provinces, and there's one for just about every occupation, like it's expanding. So you used to basically be lawyers and doctors, but it's now in many provinces, it's paramedics, it's daycare workers, like, you pretty much any job now is going to be licensed. So these people have an immense amount of control over who gets to be part of the profession. They get to decide who gets to come in and who gets to stay. And so when you give an organization like that kind of power, and then you allow them to regulate speech, and of course, if they're only regulating it in one direction, it's just an inordinate amount of power. It's absolutely very similar to what Jordan Peterson went through. Now, some people will say, well, once you're a regulated professional, you don't have the same rights. You don't have the same charter rights because you have to represent yourself as a professional in all respects, in every aspect of your life. Well, I mean, that's the premise that we're doing all of this on, but I reject the premise, frankly, because I just think that what ends up happening is this kind of a one-sided abuse and weaponizing of these organizations, right? So what happened with Peterson is people complained from the internet. Well, of course they are, because it's a great little tool. You got these organizations that are now going to dump on this person you want to cancel and do the job for you. And that's what happened with Amy as well. These were not patients who complained; they were just strangers on the internet. Another client of mine is Dr. Kulvinder Gill, who expressed COVID dissent during 2020, 2021, and she ended up with something similar. A whole bunch of people complained about her, and now she's in a regulatory nightmare. So I just don't think that should be allowed. Frankly, it's weaponizing a system, and it's gatekeeping who gets to be a part of an organization or of a profession, and you have to have the right views to do that. So yeah, some people are going to be rude and say things you don't like that might be embarrassing. From my perspective, I'd rather know that about a professional I'm going to hire or be exposed to. I'd like to know what they think. Thank you very much. Don't keep that from me. So
yeah, that's a great point. Just back to something you were saying a few minutes ago about how often the activists will make the case of, gender identity and sex are different. But then it seems like, okay, yes, well, they are different. So why are you using gender identity to replace sex? For example, bathrooms have always been separated by sex, not gender identity. So why are you allowed to access, say, the women's bathroom as a man based on your gender identity? Same as sports. Sports have never been segregated by gender identity. They've always been segregated by sex. So it seems like it's this sort of almost insidious replacement. Like, yes, they added gender identity to the protected list, but that can't really exist in the same list as sex because they are often competing rights. Now, so do you see that as almost a flaw in the law that will have to be rectified? Because how can you, how can you have both protected categories when, in order to protect one category, you must infringe on the rights of the other?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's an inherent conflict, obviously, and it's resolved if you assume or if you understand that sex is a specific category, and sometimes for certain things we need to protect sex-based categories. So matters of decency, matters of competition, where bodies are different, where identities aren't really the criteria, but bodies matter, right? Sex shouldn't be interfered with. On the other hand, sometimes there's going to be a gender, person who doesn't subscribe to whatever gendered stereotypes. Frankly, I think we're actually going in the wrong direction on that. That was actually opening up, but now it's becoming much more, boxed. If you look this way, you must be a male. Mm-hmm. But, I can see why you might want to protect gender identity. I'm going to steel man the argument. In some cases, perhaps, where somebody is just so unorthodox, maybe they are a male who dresses as a female and shouldn't be discriminated against, perhaps in getting a job or whatever. I mean, I have views on that too, but that's the argument that they could make. But you should still be able to protect sex where it matters, right? But they're not allowing that because what's happening is they are conflating it, and they're saying, if you're a trans woman, you are a woman, period. And so therefore, there's no distinction. When we talk about women as a sex class, they say it includes transgender women because they're women just like women who are born such. So, they're blurring the lines. We could probably have a reasonable workaround that makes everybody feel included in the important ways, but they don't want to have that. They want the full, recognition as though they were always women from, the moment they were assigned whatever at birth,
Yeah.
Do you think this is a political view? Because right now it seems that this whole problematic that we're talking about when it comes to gender ideology has become a left versus right issue, when in my opinion it's bipartisan. It has nothing to do, like, I'm a conservative, I'm a Christian conservative, so you can imagine what my views are on this, and Rob is a liberal, and it kind of opened his mind that women cannot have penises. This is wrong. This cannot happen. So since he realized that, he no longer aligns with the Liberal Party because
I've been kicked out of the Liberal. I'm not a liberal in good standing anymore because I might hold every other view, but because I don't think women can have penises, I'm a far right Nazi.
But do you think it's done on purpose to politicize it in order to segregate people and prevent us from having conversations like the one we're having? Because, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know Amy. I haven't spoken to her. I want to have her on the show to ask her the question, but I got a feeling that she used to be a liberal, and what's happening to her is kind of just like Rob said, they kicked me out. Like she got kicked out of the liberal movement because she doesn't believe that that women can have penises. So what's your opinion on what's going on and the way it's been weaponized politically?
Well, I mean, I think that you just said the answer. It's been weaponized politically. And I think that I'm not quite sure, the genesis of that, why it's become such a pet or, a pet advocacy group for left-wing politicians and groups, but it has. And I think the inclination, for some people, I think it's quite benign. They see this as an extension of the gay rights movement. Yes. And they want to not be, cruel, like they thought that maybe people were before. And, fair enough, but it isn't quite that. And in fact, there are a lot of people in the, gay and lesbian community who are quite concerned about this because it does interfere with other rights. And so, at the end of the day, I'm not fully in one political camp or another either, but you sort of get tarred as one or the other, depending on your view on this issue. For me, it's important to be able to communicate with each other and, have these broader discussions about the impacts. And that's how you iron it out. What happens is when you start curtailing one side's speech, then, they're going to react. And they react sometimes much more aggressively than they would have if you just had a reasonable conversation and let them express their opinions and tried to find a solution. We don't do that anymore. We demonize one side of it. Well, guess what? The backlash is going to be swift and ugly because when people can't talk, then what else are they going to do? They're going to fight back. It's just so stupid not to allow for people to be able to communicate reasonable concerns and have discussions like adults without all this discussion about harm and, discrimination and what have you, which is basically just, we don't want to hear your opinions. They interfere with our pseudo reality. Your reality interferes with our pseudo reality. And we don't want to hear about it. So I just think it's so dangerous. And I will make a quick plug because while the Justice Center has been graciously funding this particular case, I personally have started something called the Free Speech Union, along with some others in Canada, because if we don't have free speech, we don't have anything. We're going to lose it all. We're going to lose all of our rights. And we need to be able to have conversations and difficult conversations. And sometimes we're going to be really offended and disgusted by what we hear, but we need to let people talk.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, amen to that. Both of us agree. That's a core value of the show is that the need for free speech. That should not be a bipartisan, or it should be a bipartisan value. So it's one final question. Just kind of it kind of popped in my head as I was listening to you answer one of those. And you were saying, there could be some areas where you would want to protect gender identity, for example, in and I think everyone agrees no one wants anyone to be discriminated against sort of in the housing or job markets. But I was also thinking, if I was an employer and I interviewed someone and they came in and they were dressed as an obvious man, dressed in a dress, and I got a strong sense of mental instability from this person. Is that discrimination because I don't want to hire that person? How would how would that be taken? Because that doesn't, let's say I work as a contractor. I just don't think this guy is going to fit into the culture of my work environment. Can I not hire? How do you avoid discrimination in that scenario?
Yeah, it's pretty hard, and I think you'd be accused of no matter what reason you gave. Personally, I'm a bit more of a libertarian, and while I want to see people treated fairly, and I don't want to see anybody being, shunted aside because of who they are, I really don't. I mean, I'm a sort of a classical liberal in that sense, but also a bit libertarian, and I really don't even know that we should be having these kinds of requirements, but we do, and that is the law. And so you don't get to decide. If you think that if you want to discriminate against, if you don't want to hire somebody because of who they are, then technically that's discrimination, and you may find yourself in front of a tribunal. So, but you know,
giving you a call.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll probably close up there, but before we do, what's next for Amy? What does she have coming up as far as you and her and this specific case?
So we're not done by a long shot. So she got her penalty decision last week, which was all over the social media. She got a 1-month suspension when she does return to nursing, because of course she's lost her job, and she has to pay costs of $93,000 and change. So that is suspended pending our appeal. We've already filed an appeal with the BC Supreme Court on the finding of that this was unprofessional conduct at all. You know, the penalty follows from that, right? So if we are successful in the court and have a finding that in fact this wasn't unprofessional conduct, then there would be no penalty and no costs. But yeah, so the whole gamut is being fought still into the courts, and we'll see how far we have to go with that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, she's also filed with my help and the Justice Center's support claims against both of those institutions for discrimination, because BC does protect political views in their human rights code. You can't discriminate in certain contexts like employment and like regulators on political views.
Like she's being discriminated against.
Right. And so that is not an area of law that's been well fleshed out, certainly not on the gender piece. So I'm looking forward to fighting that when we get there. It's going to be a long time before all these things get ironed out. So Amy and I are going to be working together for a long time.
Nice. Nico, did you?
That's great. Thank you for joining. I don't know if you remember, but I had approached you a little while ago in order to have you on. You had told me to wait because you wanted the story to develop a bit, like that you were still waiting for the court to get back to you guys. But thank you for joining us. We'd love to have you back on. I'd love to talk to Amy. So it's definitely something that, as much as Rob and I are on completely different side of the political spectrum, we both see this as a major problem. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to seeing you fight the government. I'm always for people fighting the government, so I'm always happy to see it happen. So continue the good work, and I love the fact that you're working with the Justice Center. We have John Carpe on the show all the time. We're a big fan of what they do, so good for what you do. We're happy to have you on. Thank you again.
Perfect. Thanks. Nice talking to you guys.
Before you go, Wise Guy 666 comments says before she goes, thanks. Tell Lisa thanks. Great talk. So just
thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lisa.
Have a good day.